Well, I want to hear what you guys thought. Anything stick out? Anything you want to share? What's the differences, similarities, that kind of stuff? Anything profound? We will not continue until someone speaks.
There's a lot of things. One of the first things you can see is there's in the newer song vague imagery and the older song concrete imagery. Probably so much so that you wouldn't have today with Be Thou My Buckler.
Yeah. We don't have that verse. We don't sing that one, right? I thought it was cool, but yeah.
Buckler's kind of a funky word to sing in a song.
Yeah. What does it even mean?
It didn't stop them. And so
yeah.
That's one of the first things you can see on the page.
I mean, you gotta say buckler.
Buckler.
You gotta let it ring out. You can't say buckler. You gotta let it buckle.
Buckle.
I think we should add that back. Let's petition.
You should swap it out with verse 1. Be thou my buckler? We'll be like, what?
You should do it next time. We can do that song.
Yeah. Anything else? Stick out.
It seemed like every little verse thing of Be Thou My Vision is like a fully developed thought.
Yeah.
And like to contrast that with, the first two lines of the first, verse of that song is kind of just a more direct, simplified also thought. Immediately you get to the look where I'm standing now right after that kind of.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking about the same thing. And we're like, it's almost like where I'm standing now is representative of like one verse of Be Thou My Vision, but it's like a whole song. And instead, Be Thou My Vision is just one verse. Like it's weird.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting as well. What about like layout, like the format of the songs? Like anything different there that you notice?
Be Thou My Vision is much more simplistic format-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of like that about it because it's easier for everybody in the whole church to follow it without having to think like, oh, what's coming next?
Yeah.
Or for us on stage, like, oh, what's coming next?
Yeah.
It's all everybody knows this song, and it's something that we were all sung to as kids. And it's just a simplistic, beautiful.
Yeah. Anything else? That's really good.
We were saying like it's interesting that in the newer song repetition is used lyrically, whereas in the older song repetition is used like with the music. So like the tune is repeated, but not any of the words.
Yeah. What the nards? That's cool. Yeah. Dang. That's really awesome.
In the newer song, there's either a varied or confused direction of worship. So, like you're at some points talking to God, at some points talking to yourself, at some points talking to maybe people around you. Like look where I'm standing now. Like I don't know exactly directionally where that might fall in worship, but Be That My Vision, you have like a very clear set direction of internalized thoughts of worship towards God.
Yeah.
And so I think that's maybe a structural difference.
Yeah. Cool. That's cool. One more thought, and then we'll move forward. One more.
The language is really important to note too. That it's like one's really colloquial, one's really conversational. Obviously, because
which one?
The newer one. Obviously, like
cool.
There's a. Whereas the other one, because it's so old, obviously we're still using same language, old language, and we were talking about how generationally, like, how soon does that fall off? Clearly, if this song, if Be Thou has been around that long, we're not gonna like forget how to use these and thous if it's really survived. But maybe there may come a point where it feels so irrelevant, it's not worshipful anymore.
Yeah.
That I don't think we're there now, but it may happen.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Well, there's like newer version of Be Thou, well, not newer, but like there's been times people try to change Be Thou My Vision to make it newer language, like if You Are My Vision, but it doesn't seem to have the same feel, the same power of like what we do as be thou.
Yeah.
We don't sing that version here necessarily. We sing be thou my vision.
Yeah, we don't even sing this version here.
Sure.
It has we don't sing buckler, and we add we sing this in the Hill version, so we add that refrain or chorus, and we have our own version that we put a chorus to. I think so. Yeah. So just to put it short, I don't think the one thing I didn't want to do is have us compare the songs and be like, this one's better, this one's worse type deal. Because
we would do that though.
Do what? I
said you knew we would do that.
I'm literally not afraid of you. So yeah, in hindsight, so when we think about it, it's not like we have it's not like Be Thou My Vision is a better song than Where I'm Standing Now, you might prefer one or the other, but the big thing is I didn't want to get in some rabbit trail thinking that we in the 21st century have it right, or this other side of we in the 21st century have it wrong. It's no, actually they're both good, because we were talking in our group, it's they're expressing the way that a context, a generation spoke in a way that they think about God. We were talking, we were okay, how would a non-churched person come and they hear Be Thou My Vision? What do they do with that? It doesn't even have Jesus in it. Davis was there's not even Jesus in it. Doesn't say Jesus. And in Where I'm Standing Now, the non-church person could come in and be I get that, it's a little bit more conversational, makes a little bit more sense. Abstract for sure, but makes sense, So it's they're tackling two different fronts, Does that make sense? So they're both helpful. So yeah, I think just another thing. So we're gonna kind of do some history now, and I'm gonna try to go quick. If you guys have questions, stop me. It should be in your handout, kind of quotes and kind of major points. But even if y'all have questions, just let me know and I'll quit speaking. But just specifically talking about the style of music, and this is why we did both of those songs, because they're literally 1,500 years apart, okay, and when they were written, which is crazy. So we're going to talk about just style and how it's changed, okay, and really how blessed we are in kind of this modern place where we can write songs on stuff. So we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. So we're going to talk about the Latin Church. Okay, so when we talk about the Middle Ages, it's spanning about 1,000 years, from about 500 to 1500 AD. Almost all church music in the Latin Church was done in what language? Latin. So Latin, the entire Mass, so we all come from the Catholic Church, right? We are a product of the Catholic Church. And the Mass was done entirely in Latin. The reason is that somewhere in between either the late 5th century to about the early 7th century, the church decided that Latin was the most pure language, and there was a translation of the Bible that was being used, and it was translated by Jerome in the 5th century, and it was the Latin Vulgate, which Vulgate just means vulgar, the language that spoke, not vulgar like we would use the word vulgar. But they thought it was the purest language, so the Mass entirely was done in Latin. So imagine you're walking in to a Catholic church, and it's beautiful. The priest is speaking in Latin, and he's actually turned away from you. So I'm speaking to you like this, because I can't look at you. And then when they're singing songs, there's a Gregorian chant. That was kind of a thing, and then you get into later medieval stuff. But there was a Gregorian chant done by a choir. You didn't sing because you don't speak Latin, and they sing, and you just kind of listen to them. So it's this weird thing. That's what the Catholic Church was like. Okay, not bad, but the crazy, what? Before we go, what are some potential problems with the fact? Actually, I'm not going to ask that question yet. But Latin hadn't been spoken, okay, as a native language since about 467 A.D. Okay, so when Rome fell, Latin was made in Rome, pretty much, or was a Roman thing. When Rome fell in 457 by the Visigoths, Latin gone. No one speaks Latin anymore. It's mixed and diluted with all these other languages. And by the 7th century, I'm talking no one's speaking Latin, ever. It's a dead language, okay? So you're talking 1,000 years, roughly, so about 500 to 1,500, so about 700 years, right, about from the 8th century, 7th century. No one's speaking Latin. The priests they barely speak Latin. and you're going to church, you don't know the language that they're preaching in, you also don't know the language of the songs being sung. What are some problems with that, you guys think?
You can't worship the Lord if you don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Or you can, and you're doing it your way, and your theology might be totally messed up because you're making assumptions about what's true.
Yeah.
You can think you're worshiping something true that isn't really true.
Yeah. I think there's also, in the Middle Ages, about 5% of the population was like literate, let alone like one, they were 95% illiterate, and then you, on top of being illiterate, had to like know how to speak a dead language, a second language, let alone a dead language, So it moves like knowing God, reading about God, into this elite class of scholastics, so people that are in universities and all this kind of stuff. The crazy thing is, as the church kind of moves forward, so priests, the Catholic Church has done the Mass in Latin since 1967, okay? So it's like kept on going, and then they stopped doing it. The crazy thing, y'all know the term like hocus pocus? Everyone knows the term. So that actually comes from the fact that priests, they didn't know how to speak Latin anymore, like especially once we get into like the modern era. Like they didn't know how to speak Latin because it was such a dead language, and they didn't want to learn it. So they were just saying words during the Mass like that sounded Latin, but no one knew that they weren't speaking Latin. So the term hocus pocus comes from like a Latin sounding thing. It's like something weird. I'm not even going to try to attempt to say it, but hocus pocus is that word, like something that's not there, but like we're saying it, right? Like that's like from the Mass, and it's not a word, right? Isn't that crazy? But that's like how far removed the church was from actually like having music and having like theology in their language. It's pretty wild. I think the point I'm trying to make is people like the church, made up of peasants, common folk, were deprived of knowing God from the church because songs were not in their own language or accessible in any way for them, right? Even the Bible. You see how tradition and rituals, right, which the Catholic Church, especially in about the like 12th to 15th century, got really, really ritualistic, into icons, like very traditional, like that stuff kind of rises, right? Because no one can think for themselves. No one can read the Bible. Like no one can think about God, really. It's really weird. So the church had all the authority, and the people were ignorant against their will. Like they had no choice on the matter but ignorance, which is wild. So now, that's kind of some Latin stuff. Moving forward to the 16th century, we're back to Martin Luther. Okay, so we have the Protestant Reformations. Everybody kind of know Protestant Reformation. We're Protestants. That's kind of why. So Martin Luther, the German monk, he was from the Augustinian monastery. He saw a need for people to have a Bible in their own language, let alone songs. So Martin Luther translated the Bible from the Latin and the Greek, really, into German. And the really cool thing about Luther is his Geneva Bible is he had one page was the Bible, like the actual text, and then the next page was commentary. So he was like, everything that you need to know right here, right? Like making like use of the fact that people, like once you get into the 14th century, you have a printing press, you have like people becoming more literate. Like it's just really cool kind of like bottleneck and like explosion at the Protestant Reformation. Luther translates the Bible, and then he writes over like 50 hymns, which is really cool. Can anybody tell me? I put it on your handout too, so don't look at your handout or two, whatever. Martin Luther's most famous hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," man. It's so cool. Yeah, there's a cliffhanger. Luther wrote this hymn as a result of meditating on Psalm 46 in the midst of Black Plague, so the bubonic plague, which killed like 25 million people in Europe. It's crazy. And most people at the time were immigrating out of Europe, but Luther and his family decided to stay in Wittenberg with his family, or with the people, the peasants, the common people who couldn't leave. And Luther kept preaching and kept hosting people in his home. And Luther actually lost his daughter. She died from the Black Plague, which is wild. So we're gonna kind of move into another group activity. You have the last page on that second kind of set of handouts. You have the song, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." You can also, if you want, open up Psalm 46. You don't have to, but it's just cool to read. It's almost verbatim. And really, this is more of like a personal one. Y'all can share with people around you if you want. But there's questions on that handout as well. When we come with like, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," just imagine the context. Black plague sweeping through Europe. Everybody's leaving. Tons of people are dying. Luther stays and like pins this hymn. And the really cool thing is throughout, like once Luther dies, this hymn, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," is actually inscribed on his tombstone, which is really cool. But when he dies, the Lutheran Church, when they were walking through like really hard times, the priest would get up and they would say, "Let's sing the 46th," because it's like the 46th Psalm. And everybody would stand up and sing "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." So really cool. There's questions on there. And really just a time to reflect. Like, how do you deal with suffering? So, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," written in the middle of suffering. Any of the truths of this song stick out to you? And then the last question is like, which verse sticks out to you the most? And then even another question would be like, what verse doesn't make sense? Would be interesting. But yeah, I just want y'all to read "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." It's one of my favorite songs. And talk about it, like reflect on those questions. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes or so to read, think, and then I'll leave you alone. And then we'll go again. Cool? Sweet. You have 5.